the margarita got to me a little faster than normal, and I was just thinking, like, what about that show? And before I know it, I was messaging my contacts over at IWTV. I'm like, hey, I've had exactly one margarita. What would it take to make something like this happen? Just out of curiosity. And before I know it, I'm messaging wrestlers to ask them to participate and trying to put a card together. It really escalated quickly.
Thanks so much for coming on the show. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Absolutely. Well, that means a lot to me. No, it's an honor to have you here. I mean, such a big name in the wrestling sphere, and you've got an exciting time coming up with Mania Weekend building. Because again, we said off screen, I'm sure WrestleMania isn't a busy enough weekend for you already without having this to also deal with.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's apart from the WrestleMania events, the 2 nights, there are just countless independent events that run through town, and I want to do my best to attend as many of them as possible. But also I had the bright idea to, since Philadelphia is essentially the hometown of myself and Pro Wrestling Illustrated, run my own charity event over the weekend. So
yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about that. Let's dive straight into that as the first thing we chat about. Thrash Elvania, great name, love it, brilliant name. Talking about a show that you decided to put on for a really good cause, also in memory of your partner, right, who sadly passed away this year. I'm really sorry about that. I mean, like, heartbreaking for you, and I thought it was going out to you. But I'm sure you must be really looking forward to putting this on in her honor.
Yes, absolutely. So the show is called Thrash Elvania in honor. So Thrash Elvania was sort of a portmanteau of our two surnames, because her name is Megan Thrash, and which people always thought was some kind of like punk name or fake name, but no, that was her real name.
That's a great real name to have. Oh my god!
And when we got married, it was like, no way. Like, I'm not the kind that would have like, hey, you should take my name anyway. But it would have never been a question. She wasn't going to lose that last name. So friends of ours would call us the Thrash Elvanias because we had 2 last names. And then, of course, it's WrestleMania weekend. But it's in her memory. Megan had a pretty rare form of cancer called cholangiocarcinoma. So it's bile duct cancer, essentially. It's one of the newer in terms of like understanding it and how it generates and how it spreads, and even things that happened to her during her 3 years battling the disease are going to go into the record and inform. And I realize that's not unique to her, but just this is a type of cancer that usually spreads through the digestive tract. In her case, it eventually ended up going to her brain, it's very, very rare that happens. But that just tells you how new this disease is in terms of understanding, because essentially if it's caught early, then it's great, and not great, but it's much better outlook in that they can do surgical resections and that sort of thing. And it is, a much tougher road if someone is looking at a later diagnosis. But, there's hope, and there are treatments improving the outlook for people who are battling this. So basically, the idea is to do the show to give back. It's a couple of weeks before my 40th birthday. And Megan, one of her goals as far as benchmarks she wanted to stick around for, and sadly did not make it, was I want to be around for my husband's 40th birthday and throw him a party. And so this is kind of our way of doing that together, honoring her memory. And all the money that's raised from this show, I'm basically just absorbing all the cost up front, so that every dollar that's made from ticket sales, from streams, and so on goes right to the Cholangiocarcinoma Foundation here in the States.
No, it's beautiful. That's beautiful. Wonderful. Like, again, great cause. And again, I'm so sorry, but it's lovely that you're doing this in her honor, and for yourself as well, as that sort of like early birthday present as well. And I'm sure it's going to be great. I mean, like, again, I know I've said it a couple of times jokingly, but like, you are already so busy. Like, how have you found time to even put this together? Like, how like, when did take me back to the beginning in terms of like the seed of the idea of like, okay, maybe this is something I want to do, to like now a couple of weeks removed from WrestleMania, it coming to fruition.
So I guess it started when Philadelphia was announced as the host city for WrestleMania, which would have been about a year ago. And I made a joke to promoters that I knew. If anybody wants to let me book a vanity 40th birthday card, go ahead. And it was this running joke, and not anything that was ever, in all likelihood, going to happen. So fast forward many, many months. It was actually back in December. I was out in Los Angeles to cover the Combat Princess USA show which is a Tokyo Joshi Pro and Prestige in Los Angeles. And I was sitting there kind of like watching the sunset over the ocean. This is the first time I'd ever seen the Pacific Ocean in person. It was a very like kind of emotional moment. And I was sitting there having a margarita, which was back when she could drink, one of Megan's favorite drinks. And just having a moment, and being someone who doesn't drink so much at this stage of my life, the margarita got to me a little faster than normal, and I was just thinking, like, what about that show? And before I know it, I was messaging my contacts over at IWTV. I'm like, hey, I've had exactly one margarita. What would it take to make something like this happen? Just out of curiosity. And before I know it, I'm messaging wrestlers to ask them to participate and trying to put a card together. It really escalated quickly.
It clearly did. I mean, like, again, obviously you have, I guess, like the bonus of being like in contact with a lot of wrestlers just generally through work, but also, yes. Again, we're going to get into the card in more detail, but like seeing the card and seeing those wrestlers that are attached to it, you must have been like just delighted, I imagine, with how willing people were to be involved, how up for being involved they were.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, I had some people, like, in general, where I could, I've tried to meet people's usual rates, even though, again, paying it out of pocket, but it's a special occasion, it's a one-time thing. But even then, I know people are giving me breaks, and they're telling me this, oh yeah, this is my rate. Because some people didn't want to take anything. I said, well, I can't pay you nothing. Like, you're still coming out, you're still putting your body on the line. I appreciate, what you do with the money after I give it to you is your business. If you want to turn around and donate it, wonderful. But yeah, a lot of the wrestlers who I've booked are, at this point, they're friends of mine, which is interesting because then, you cover them for the magazine, you have to kind of step back and look at things more objectively. But in the case of this show, I don't need to do that. I just need to, hey, I would love for you to be on this show and showcase you and have you face this person or that person. Like, what do you, kind of working with people, like, who would you like to work a match with? And as it started to take shape, it just got, more and more exciting because, we have multiple title matches from different promotions on there. We have, wrestlers, not just from the U.S., but we have wrestlers from the UK, wrestlers from Japan. So this is really a very exciting show. I think just on paper, it's very interesting. I don't have the pockets of a Brett Lauderdale or someone who can kind of just make all the dream matches happen. And, that's awesome. And he's got it handled. And I will watch those shows and hopefully get to a couple of them in person. But for my purposes, I wanted to take people who I had some kind of rapport with, or people I just really, really enjoyed their work and wanted to see them showcased in this kind of unique, like quirky show, for lack of a better word. I think there's a lot of unusual matchups on here.
But I think that's what makes it fun, right? Isn't it? I think that's like, again, I think it's part of the beauty of wrestling is the diversity in terms of what you can do and what you can put on. And like, obviously, being a Brit myself, obviously a couple of matches spring to mind with a couple of people. like Rhio Hyan, let's talk about that, but that's huge. That's a mega match to put on. And again, Rhio and Hyan, both absolute powerhouses in the ring. It's going to be a slugfest a little bit.
I am very excited for that match. I know that both of them are excited. As of right now, that's actually Hyan's only match of the weekend, which I was shocked that, she wasn't being booked all over the place, but she's coming out just for this. So, which is an honor, and I just, really enjoy her work, and she just keeps getting better and better. I watched the Kitsune show she was wrestling on last night, and it was just phenomenal.
Yeah, she is. She I think she tweeted it earlier today or yesterday, best unsigned women's wrestler in the world. It's hard to argue, right? It's hard to argue that.
She is, she's very much in the mix for that. And I'll just say that much. I don't want to hurt any feelings. You know what I'm saying?
No, she's up there. She's up there, for sure.
But well, my point is I wouldn't argue with what she's saying. But, so in trying to think who she would face, I knew it had to be like a really good, top-notch opponent, and kind of been in touch with Progress Wrestling with a couple of the other things we're doing over the weekend, and I said, completely independent from anything with PWI, because this is an independent show in the sense also that it's nothing to do with the wrestling magazine officially. It's unofficial PWI show. It's me hosting it, and part of that's a liability thing. Like Pro Wrestling Illustrated is published by a media company that mostly does puzzle magazines and that sort of stuff. So they're just like, what happens if a chair flies and hits someone in the face? We don't want to get sued, and I understand why they're worried about that, even though, we know that's not going to happen. Although maybe I just brought it into existence.
I was going to say, one of the wrestlers on this show is watching this being like, hang on.
Like, oh, challenge accepted. But so anyway, it's just a way of saying, like, well, I'm going to do this anyway. And they loved the idea of the show, and they were very supportive of it. And they said, obviously, like, don't shy away from the fact who you are and your association with the magazine, but we can't, attach the branding. And I probably could have pushed it a little further, but I thought, you know what, it's fine. We're just gonna do this as is. However, in my conversations with Progress, I kind of said, just out of curiosity, and you don't have to like set anything up, but are people open for bookings? And they're not wide open for bookings. They're open for bookings in certain situations that make sense. And it was enough to kind of see like, oh, okay, well, Rhio is coming over, and she's she may not be by the time we get to the Thrash Elvania show, but she's the women's champion of Progress. Like that's a really huge thing. And just, one of the top wrestlers in Europe, full stop right now. So to have her versus Hyan, that's very, very exciting. Once I saw that was a possibility, I kind of had it in the back of my head for a couple of weeks. I'm like, I wonder. Oh wow, I actually can do this.
I was gonna say, when the guys at Progress told you that like potentially people were open for bookings if the situation was right, were you like, I've got this situation, I want Hyan to face someone? Like, because I imagine if you would tell them that, they'd be like, well, obviously we'll set someone up then.
I eventually just came out with it because I was very vague and dancing around it. Because again, also I didn't want it to, we're doing certain things with them, and it all will become clear soon enough, but just some fun social media, digital side of things with our YouTube host, Candice Cordelia is going to be doing some stuff. But, we have that, and then we have, we cover them in the magazine. And I said, just to be clear, like we could still do this stuff. We could still, you'll still get the same exact coverage. And this has no bearing on it. If you say if this is inappropriate, like to tell me, like, stop asking about our talent, And they said, no, like it's, you can, we'll send an email even, but it's between you and them to work it out. But when it was very vague and I was just kind of dancing around it, I said, okay, I'm just going to come out with it. The match is Hyan Rhio. And then like, oh yeah, that's great. Like we would have booked that ourselves, but she was just, when Hyan has been over, she's had a very full calendar, and actually I shouldn't say that they said they would have booked it themselves, but it's I don't know if they said they may not have actually said that, but I would wager that they would.
Yeah, no, given the opportunity, I feel like most promotions would book that if they had the chance. Yeah, for sure. But I love that.
So they may not have literally said that, but it's the power of reading minds, I can tell.
No, of course. Yeah, it's just intuition, isn't it, at this point? Yeah. When you've been in the business as long as you have, you just get a knack for it.
Sure.
And of course, the other Brit you've got over, a man like Dereiss as well, very different to Rhio in terms of like, the character, like the style they put across. I bet you're looking forward to his musical abilities showcasing on the show.
Oh man, yeah. I mean, it's not the main reason he was booked. But
no, of course not. But it all adds to it, doesn't it? It all adds to it.
It's the lyrical dragon tool, of course. So he's going to be in a scramble match that's going to be great.
It's a little stacked. It's a little stacked. Yeah.
Yeah. We have Dereiss, we have Jay Bougie, and we have Alec Price, and two of them are known. Alec Price, former independent wrestling world champion. Both he and Jay Bougie are regulars for Major League Wrestling over the last year. And then on the other side of the coin, we have three slightly more local wrestlers, and we have Lucas DeSangro, who is and Gabby Ortiz, who are both part of the Monster Factory training group and the documentary that's on Apple TV Plus. And then we have Rob Radke in the mix, who's another just great area wrestler who I think a lot of people who haven't seen him perform before will, watch this match and be very impressed. So it's kind of seeing people from spread out a little bit all over the place, come into the ring, and
they're the ones that are gonna. They're the ones that are going to want to take home the W more so, aren't they? In terms of, like, obviously, I know it's like just down the road, but in terms of Mania weekend in Philly, they're going to want to show Philly pride and get the W over there. So that little extra incentive.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's great, and like again, some fantastic matches away from the Brits as well. I think like the one that stands out for me is like, again, I know it's a favorite of yours, favorite of myself as well, Shazza McKenzie against Delmi Exo. I mean, like, Shazza's great. She's had a fantastic year, especially like with everything she's had going on in terms of moving over to the States and like readjusting her life, moving her entire life, but still wrestling this much. And she's another one that I put up in contention for like one of the best unsigned women's wrestlers in the world. I think she's fantastic. Like, yeah, I know obviously you guys are huge fans of her as well. And like, again, that match against Delmi, that's a huge match as well. Again, like, you're putting on banging matches here. This is like a barn burner show.
So those two actually, and people tell you things and you're always, maybe they're just being nice or whatever. But apparently this is a match the two of them have wanted to have for years now, and they've never been able to wrestle one-on-one. So I was very happy to find that out. In my mind, they were just two wrestlers who would put on an interesting match between their personalities and their ring styles that they would gel nicely. I like both of them a lot as people. That's another thing. I was trying to stay away from booking obvious jerks. So people.
I'm glad. I think we're all glad of that. I think that's nice.
With the exception of maybe a couple the Brian Johnsons or the the Darius Carters, but I mean I think they're more like lovable jerks. Yeah. But you have Shazza and Delmi, and yeah, just very excited for that one. And I will add, I'm not sure when this will come out, but this coming week when we're speaking, the new issue of PWI is dropping, and one of the feature stories in that is a story about Shazza McKenzie, and I actually wrote that one myself. And it's about her journey from Australia to the U.S. There's some, I could be wrong, I think there's some elements of her story that haven't really been told publicly before, but either way, it's like just in such a very compelling and honest way. There's we had a local photographer who followed her around one day and kind of photos for her training, for her matches, things like that. It's just a really cool sort of old school wrestling magazine feel to it. So I'm very excited for that. Very, very excited for the match. So.
Yeah, no, I saw that advertised. I saw you tweet that out. That story was coming out. I can't wait to read that. Again, big fan of Shazza myself, and she's done fantastic work. I look forward to reading that piece, and again, seeing that match as well. And you got some going on to another match. You got like some. I like it, like the fun sort of like couples action, haven't you? With Brandon Kirk, Kasey Catal versus Laynie Luck and GPA. That's going to be a lot of fun. I think I think it's a match that you see the Kirks on anything and they're bruising and you expect it to be really violent. But I also imagine it could just be a lot of fun as well, like a little bantery as well.
So as of now, the plan for that is not to be a no disqualification match. It's not a straight death match. I will say that, even if the stipulation does get added. Even if there are disqualifications, there are ways to bend the rules and for things to get a little bit out of control. But at the risk of Brandon hearing this, the Kirks have been two of my favorite performers to watch over the last couple of years. I just really, Brandon, Kirk, and Kasey Catal, both their respective rises to the ICW No Holds Barred American Deathmatch Championship, which is really just, this internationally defended championship. It's been defended in the UK and in Australia and all over the US. So to have the two of them on this show, I just knew early on if I was doing this, I have to get buy-in from them. And at the time when we were starting out, Kasey was still on leave from her injury, and it wasn't clear exactly when she'd be back, but so they were, they're great folks. And the idea was to ideally carry on this seed of an idea that they had a few years back, which was the Kirk's Couples Invitational. And I think originally it was meant to be a show over a big GCW weekend, and they would have various wrestling couples and probably a tournament. But I figured, well, that's going to be very expensive to do that. But maybe we can do one match, kind of borrow their branding for it, which they were cool with. And I thought, well, what wrestling couples are out there that would be a good opponent for them? And I mean, right away comes to mind another rascal in GPA and Laynie Luck. And those two have been doing great work across the Midwest, a really impressive run as freelance tag team champions. Again, a really fun dynamic. And I think the contrast that you'll see between them and the Kirks will be really fun. And again, just another scenario where I think these folks are, pretty excited to work with each other. I mean, it's, aside from, Brandon and GPA maybe a little more surly about it publicly, but I think privately everyone's very excited for this match.
Yeah, for sure. Why wouldn't you be? Why wouldn't you? I mean, that's the thing. Like, we talked about like what is that? It's like 4 matches already, and it's already like stacked. But again, like sort of going back to what I was saying before. Like again, you had this like seed of an idea, and maybe had a drink and thought, what, let's do it. But like when in your mind does it become real? Where you are like you started it, you're like, okay, this is like fun, and then what's the moment where you're like, oh shit, this is actually happening? Like,
I think once I booked more than a few wrestlers and reserved the room, because then it's like, oh, all right, well now I need to look at my budget. And long story short, I mean, I had a budget and I'm probably about 25% over what I was planning, but it's screw it. It's one time. We're going to do this. It's going to be memorable. We'll have, the video that we can go back later and enjoy, the video cassette.
I think that's the thing, though, isn't it? That video cassette, I was going to say, that's old school there. I swear, if you release a video cassette of this, it's going to be a collector's item. Maybe a DVD Blu-ray. I know IWTV will do that through SmartMark Video. I don't know if that's an option here, so I'll have to see about that. But no, it's going to be, if nothing else, it will be live on IWTV, and then it will be in archive format. So if someone doesn't watch it live, they can go back and watch it on demand later on. Yeah, brilliant. I mean, like again, we've spoken about some of the matches, and they are brilliant. I mean, like I know. Again, almost like putting your journalist hat on. You've got to be unbiased in certain situations. But are you a little biased? Is there one match that you look at and you're like, that's the one I'm most looking forward to?
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's hard. Man. I mean, the match that you just mentioned is definitely one of them. That's our planned main event. I mean, things can always change. But another one is another big tag match, which is just on paper a very strange one, but I think it will work very well. And that was our final announced match. And that's my pal Kaya McKenna, with whom I co-host the Pro Wrestling Industry podcast. She's teaming up with Japan's Ram Kaichao, who is just a really unique and entertaining performer. If you've never seen her, go check out her work. And Ram is very comes out in like the corpse paint and like kind of like evil, and then Kaya's the good witch. So they're gonna have this interesting dynamic. And then they're facing this bi-coastal duo, I've called it, in Viva Van from California, and then Ava Everett, who's an East Coaster. And LSG will be in their corner, and there's already things like Kaya's threatening to turn LSG into a newt after the match. Just all sorts of, it's going to be really zany, and I think probably entertaining for the people in the crowd who won't be already huge wrestling fans, who are just kind of coming out to support the cause. I think they will enjoy that one. I
was going to say, you took out the turned into a newt insurance though, didn't you, just in case?
Had to, yeah.
Yeah. I imagine that's a premium. That's what helped the budget go a bit over. Cause...
Yes, in fact, somebody put up the Python I Got Better GIF, and then I think Kaya either commented back or texted and said, "No guarantees on that. It'll get better."
No, it's brilliant. It's brilliant, and we mentioned obviously at the beginning, put on this in this show for Megan's honor as well, and like. Again, I think she'd be so proud of what you've done in the show you're putting on here. Like, again, stacked.
I'm slightly alarmed by the amount of money.
You'd be like, what are you doing? No, put the wallet away.
But the thing is, Megan would sit, and she wasn't as big into the independent side of things as I was, but she would sit and watch shows with me. She would, follow a lot of the same people on social media. She would. Chat with them over video calls if I was doing that. these are people who she was, acquainted with, if not hanging out all the time. And I think she would feel good that they're going and doing this for her. Like I remember even specifically, we watched like the 2-part Shazza McKenzie, Shazza Takes America tour. We watched the Kirk's The Life of on IWTV. She felt a connection to these wrestlers in much the same way I do. So I think it's not just a bunch of random people that I've chosen. It's everybody's on there for a very, kind of specific purpose and reason.
I was going to say, do you look at the card and think there's I asked about you, but do you think there's a match that she would have looked at or a wrestler she would have looked at and been like, that's going to be my match to watch?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, she loved Kaya, so I think like that match is a good one. What else? I think the Scramble. I mean, she liked a good, just kind of crazy spot fest, which I'm not saying it's necessarily going to be like that, but Scrambles have a way of becoming that.
They normally tend to swerve that way, don't they? But that's always the fun of it, isn't it?
Yes.
It's the crazy wild card match that you get.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I think the only kind of normal-ish match you would see on this whole card is the Dragon Gate Spotlight, which is Shun Skywalker and Kota Minoura, and only because they've had matches before in a fairly quote unquote normal setting. I mean, they have an established relationship, and
yeah, I was going to say normal is like the loose word there, isn't it? Like it depends how you define normal.
And even then, I think it's been close to 5 years since they've had a singles match against one another. So it's, like Dragon Gate is more tag team and trios matches and that sort of stuff. So
yeah,
in the lucha tradition, but.
Yeah, no, it's going to be a great show. It's going to be a great show. I want to get into a couple of other things just while I have you here, and then we'll circle back to the show at the end as well. But again, like, we've spoken a lot about Megan. If you don't mind, of course, if you do mind, this isn't live and I can cut everything out. But I just wanted to ask, in terms of wrestling, we've spoken to a lot of wrestlers on the show who have gone through a lot of stuff, like, and said that wrestling has really been that escape from everything that was going on. I mean, for Megan in those 3 years she was battling the cancer, and for yourself as well, like both before and now, does that reign true? Does that like ring true in terms of wrestling is that ultimate thing that can take you out of all the things that are wrong?
100%, yeah. We definitely spent many nights watching. I mean, there were nights when it's it's a Friday at 10 o'clock, which is when Rampage airs here, and it's like, Rampage is on, why don't you have it on? I'm like, you're telling me to put on Rampage? Because it just becomes part of this, like, oh, let's get immersed in this world for an hour. And it's about more than, oh, this match is on that I want to see tonight. It's kind of being in the moment and going to that little fantasy world that wrestling can pull you into. But I mean, I can even say, just in terms of this job, I mean, I was freelancing on and off with PWI for more than a decade. But when I started the job, it was about a week and a half before the pandemic global shutdown. So I learned much of the job remotely. Thankfully got in there a little bit first and saw where things were located and like, here's how you scan photo negatives and things like that. Just a lot of things that would be very important if I had learned them not in person in the same room. It would have been difficult for me with my learning style. But, between that, the pandemic, Megan, got sick, got diagnosed in 2020. In a lot of ways, this decade for me personally and the people around me has been hot rubbish. But wrestling has been a haven and an oasis, and it's been great to be able to sort of throw myself into covering it and going to these shows and now promoting a show, and it's really the absolute best. There's nothing like it. There's no other sport, art form, whatever, what have you. Nothing can compare. It's really just, it's been with me for most of my life, and I'd imagine probably until I am become a corpse, whatever way that happens.
I was going to say, are you able to, like, as in that's the thing that I think impressed me most about you and following you on social media and stuff, and now talking to you, is like your love and passion for it, despite the fact that, like, essentially it's been your job for so long. Because I think a lot of times when it's your job for so long, you can become a little like jaded by it, or like be so focused in the work that you can't enjoy it as a fan. but it seems like you really still do, and like still have that love for it. Then you can like take yourself out of, you know, the journo mind and into like just the fan mindset.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not going to say it's, you know, easy every week, and certainly there are weeks where, oh, I don't have the, you know, the headspace to watch this show or cover this or whatever else. The beautiful thing is that we have this technology now where we can record the shows, we can revisit them, you pause them and come back to them later. And, you know, more than that, we can see all of this wrestling from all over the world that we just would have been so difficult for us to even access before. Which in turn makes more people pop up and do their own wrestling. I mean, you know, we had a big one lately. People have been talking about the wrestling in Uganda with the soft ground wrestling promotion. It's obvious how many hundreds of hours that those wrestlers have put into learning those moves without, you know, because you do those wrong, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. They say, you know, the don't try this at home thing is for a reason. And then you have similar thing happened, you know, in Vietnam. Vietnam Pro Wrestling started as ostensibly a backyard wrestling promotion, and far from the only place like that. I mean, even go back years in the U.S. to Omega Wrestling, which is, you know, where the Hardys came from, and Shane Helms and some others. It's, I don't know where I was going with this, but it's just...
No, but I get it. Like, it's that social media, like, allows you to see all those things that you wouldn't normally see. And, like, again, obviously, like, the soft ground wrestling, and like you say, in Vietnam as well, like, those are two that I think are, like, sort of, like, just getting noticed. And, like, I always say the one that sticks in my mind, and I've said it to wrestlers, I've said it to Shazza McKenzie, to a lot of other Aussie wrestlers as well, is that I think that pre-pandemic, that was the Aussie scene for me. Despite the fact that so many great Australian and New Zealand wrestlers have been signed by like big companies, I always felt like the Aussie scene was so overlooked. Like, because again, and they said it themselves, it's because it's so far out the way, it's so tough for people to get to, and time-wise it's so difficult for people to watch from outside Australia, that like it just felt like it was this underground place where the scene was great and the wrestlers were great, but just no one paid attention to it. And now I feel like it's coming up. I feel like people are now paying attention to the Aussie scene and everything it has to offer.
And it is easier to follow it again, which does help. But it really is, you know, these big names coming out of there, and that's a lot of times that honestly is someone coming over, like a Shazza McKenzie, and working in the States or working in the UK, and then kind of getting noticed that way. But yeah, there's a lot of reasons for it, and people have discussed why it is, but the standard for wrestling in Australia, I think, generally seems to be a lot higher. Like, you go in and you watch the average Australian wrestling show, it's good. It's really good, because there's only so many spots on the show, there's only so many promotions, they only run shows so often, and, you know, beyond that, you know, you have a lot of the same people you're working with, and reps make people good, but also increase their chemistry they have with one another. So you have this little ecosystem that has been created there, and it is really special. And I think it's definitely something that, you know, especially even like a great entry point would be the annual Coliseum tournament that's there, you know, because you bring wrestlers from around Australia and they go and they compete. And, you know, I love this idea of centralizing things that come from disparate places. And I mean, to me, that's one of the most beautiful things about pro wrestling, and, you know, a wrestling magazine, for instance, is that you can go and you can read about or watch or learn about all of these different implementations of this thing that we all appreciate so much.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely, 100% agree, 100%. I mean, we're talking, again, I know I said, like, sort of in the beginning, before we recorded, we don't really talk about WWE and stuff here, but it is WrestleMania weekend. And we're not going to talk about WrestleMania itself, but I want to know, as someone like yourself, who's been covering wrestling for so long, you must have had a weird WrestleMania experience here and there at some point, right? There must be, like, a couple of, like, just odd moments, Mania weekend-wise, where you're like, what is happening right now?
So... like in person? Like
like you being there, like over the weekend. It doesn't have to be at Mania itself, but like just over the weekend.
Sure. So here's my dirty secret. This is the first WrestleMania weekend I've attended in quite a few years. In fact, the last one was WrestleMania 20.
Oh, wow.
That's how long it has been. Yes. So that was in New York City. As it happened, you know, kind of, So the last time WrestleMania was in Philadelphia, one, I was a little bit on the younger side. Two, I was not a big wrestling fan at that time, which might seem bizarre because that was a red hot period for wrestling, and all of my friends were very into it. I think maybe there was a small part of me that, hey, all of you made fun of me for watching this when I was a kid, and so but that was during the lapsed period. Got back into it, went to the one in New York. I think it was basically in the years immediately following that, I couldn't afford to go to another one. I couldn't travel, I couldn't afford a hotel room, I couldn't afford all this other stuff. And for the longest time, it really was just that WrestleMania show and like Raw the Monday after. There wasn't this whole just explosion of independent shows. And then just in more recent years, I mean, you had the pandemic. With Megan being sick, I really could not travel until honestly late 2022 or early 2023. So that was just out of the question. I don't recall where they were the couple of years before that, but what I did was sit at home and watch everything from the Collective and the IWTV shows and just be very resentful that I wasn't there.
I think that's the thing. I struggle to watch it all because in my mind I'm just like, oh, I want to be there.
Yes, it is. There's FOMO is a real thing. Yeah. I will also say I did go to the 16 Carat weekend from WXW. I mean, granted, those are just one promotion running events, but they do try to sort of give it that WrestleMania weekend feel where you have all these smaller events with different talent on them. And that was a really cool thing. And it kind of got me more excited for this WrestleMania weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, like, again, sort of not similar in terms of like that, but like in terms of the feel of it, like I think that was my first taste of it was last year when AEW came over here, because again, I've not had the pleasure of going to a Mania yet. Again, money and shit is like, it's very expensive to get to Mania from outside the US, but like, and even in the US to be fair, but also, yeah, like that was like crazy, because I was like, I bet this is how WrestleMania feels, because you had all these indie shows running, and like there was just this buzz that I was like, this is really weird, like to see all like this many wrestling fans in London in one time.
But I mean, I think that's, and there were other shows running, but I was surprised at how long it took for some of those to be announced, because I was even, at one point I was considering coming over, and there were many reasons I ended up not being able to do it, but my thought was, well, surely, if Forbidden Door happens in, well, maybe Forbidden Door is a bad example, but like just some of the other, like secondary WWE pay-per-view or secondary AEW pay-per-view occurs, and then this small ecosystem of wrestling promotions crops up around, and then you have tens of thousands of wrestling fans, who are going to be at Wembley, and a lot of them, I mean, they're there for an AEW show, so they're really, it's a great opportunity for all the different promotions to pop up and present an event if they can. So I like that happens. I think it's funny that I can't think of a single other industry where because I'll try to explain to people like, oh, WrestleMania is coming to town, right? Well, there's about 40 other events happening with other wrestling companies. Like, wait, what? First of all, some people don't know there's other wrestling companies. But then but just think about this. Would you might have the Super Bowl weekend. Okay, you'll have things on television. You might have, I don't know if the Puppy Bowl makes it overseas. Yeah,
no, I know. No, I'm very familiar with the Puppy Bowl. Yeah.
Okay, good. A lot of times it's the best game of the weekend.
Yeah.
You don't have where, okay, all of a sudden everybody's going to show up at the Super Bowl host city and have an arena football game, or have.
Or like the World Cup, right? You wouldn't have like the FIFA World Cup and like have all the local teams. Even though they should. Now that I say it, it sounds bonkers. That should totally happen, because like if I'm not going to a World Cup match, I'd go and see like a local team play. If like you knew that like 10,000 people were going to be there.
It's a great idea. I don't know why. It's funny. The closest comparison I've been able to come up with, as strange as it sounds, I came up with years ago, because it seemed like before there were all these wrestling events that would happen with actual cards, it seemed like Jim Ross would go and do his one-man show, wherever WWE was. Right. And I used to joke that Jim Ross doing that was like Hedwig and the Angry Inch, where Tommy Gnosis becomes this global superstar, and then Hedwig decides to follow him to every city and play like at a smaller bar across the street. So the closest comparison I found for WrestleMania weekend is Hedwig and the Angry Inch.
I mean, that's just a wonderful comparison. It is.
I can't.
It is wild. It is wild that no other sport is like that. No other sport is like that, where
I can't even think entertainment. I mean, you know, South by Southwest Festival or Cannes or you know, if you, music, Glastonbury, Riot Festival, Lollapalooza. I can't think of any. Hey, we're having this smaller festival next.
Oh, that's yeah. I tell you what, if no one does that, like the next to Glastonbury Festival, like they're missing out there. That's a huge opportunity.
Maybe they do. Maybe this exists and I just sound very...
Or maybe everyone's going to watch this and this will be the seed that grows it. This will be the moment that all these things happen. And we can look back on this and be like, "That we made that happen."
And then maybe we're apologetic about it because it'll all be too much.
Yeah, it was terrible. Like, oh no, it wasn't us. It was someone must have thought of it before. Brilliant. Well, but Kevin, we've got a little like... sort of like in closing kind of feature we run here on the show, and unfortunately it's a shame I couldn't give you any, like we have a lot of like wrestler specific ones, but we also have some non-wrestler specific ones which I put up for people like yourself who do more of the reporting and less of the in-ring action, and this feature is called The Matches That Made Me. So I'm going to give you some scenarios. They're not all necessarily wrestling matches per se, but I'm going to give you some scenarios, and I want you let me know what comes to mind for each one.
Okay.
So the first one is the match that made me a wrestling fan.
I would say the match that made me like a lifelong fan. It wasn't the first one I saw. Was probably the Hulk Hogan Ultimate Warrior match from WrestleMania 6. I don't even know how many times we rented that cassette tape and rewatched it.
It's iconic. It is iconic. It's iconic.
It's iconic. It's iconic. I haven't watched it in many years. I watched it, the last time I did watch it, I still enjoyed it, but kind of in a different way. It was, you can still see it for the moment that it is, and also, like, wow, this was relatively, you know, I wouldn't say quaint because it was this huge stadium full of screaming wrestling fans, but, you know, relatively tame compared to some
I was going to say, you look at it very differently, don't you? Know, seeing wrestling in the scene now, like, it comes across very different, like, both the match and the crowd.
Or even comparing it to, you know, I got into WCW maybe a year or so after that, and just the more physical, sports-like presentation that they had was very different than that. And watching just old territory tapes and things. But I think that's the match that kind of, like, got the hooks in me.
Yeah. Well, I assume in that case, then the next one could be the same answer then, because it's the first pay-per-view I rented.
Well, okay, so when I say rented in this case, I mean the cassette tape. So I have to think the first one I watched.
Yeah, go on. Let's say that one. Yeah. What was the first pay-per-view you watched, like, live?
It must have been SummerSlam 1991, maybe.
Nice. A year before the big one, really. A year before the one that matters.
Yes. Or it may have been one of... No, I think so. I don't think I watched any in 1990. It might have been WrestleMania 91, but yeah, the Wembley show was... oh my God, so good. They need one of my favorite... The main event's one of my favorite matches of all time.
I think it is one of the greatest matches of all time. Absolutely. Yeah.
I was able to tell Bret Hart that in person when I skipped a night class, which is, you only have like 10 of those a semester when I was in university, to go meet Bret Hart in one of two North American appearances that he had promoting his DVD, and one of them happened to be at a Best Buy in Northeast Philadelphia. And I went there and I was able to tell him that, and he was, I forget what he even said back, but the fact that he didn't grumble at me or say anything nasty about Bill Goldberg made it memorable. Yeah.
Love it. The next one was the first live event I ever attended.
That was a WWF house show. I don't remember the exact date, but the first match I saw, I think, was Ricky Steamboat against the Warlord, I want to say. So that should give you an idea of like the time frame. Yeah.
I mean, Steamboat in your first live match is a winner. That's like...
Yeah. Yep, yeah.
Do you remember
it was fantastic.
Do you remember what the main event was?
Not on that show. I know I did... I think the second show I went to was that loop where they had Hogan and Flair in the main event, and they would do the Dusty finish every night. And I remember even having watched wrestling for a couple of years at that point, really buying into the Dusty finish for a moment. Like, Ric Flair beat Hulk Hogan for the time. Like, and of course they overturned it. Oh,
I love that. I love that. I don't normally say this, but like, I normally, and again, I don't want to age you at all, but the first live event I went to happened to be the one in London where it was a Monday Night Raw and Shawn Michaels and John Cena put on that like hour-long clinic.
Oh my gosh,
and like,
yeah.
The thing is, I've watched it back so many times since then. I'm like, this is an incredible match. But I was like so young at the time. I was just like, I was super excited that I was seeing John Cena and Shawn Michaels, and it didn't even register to me like how good that match was. I was just like, yeah, it's a pretty good match. And I watch it back and I'm like, oh my god, I was underselling it so much.
They've never done anything like that again, really, where they had a match that was meant to be a normal length, and I think they even had other matches announced that weren't.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, it was super confusing again for like young me watching it. I was like, but there's meant to be more matches. What's happening?
Right. It was such a strange thing, and it was pre-taped, so I think I did hear that it went long by the time it happened. But even watching, I was like, wow, they really did go the entire rest of the show with it.
It is mad that that's not happened since. Like, that it's not just been like a mad close that's like really overruns.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe AEW did it with one of their time limit draws, but it's generally not happened.
Yeah, it is wild. Yeah, it was a wild first. Again, I'm mad at myself, like younger me, for not appreciating that match while I had it in the moment. The next one's not a match. It's the first one that's not a match on this. It's the first piece of wrestling merch I ever owned.
Oh my gosh, that's a hard one. I remember I had a Legion of Doom Road Warriors shirt early on. I don't know if that was the first, but that's the first one that's popping into my head.
Nice, that's a solid choice.
I think it was a hand-me-down from a neighbor too, who had like accidentally shrunk it in the wash, and he was older. You know, he was maybe late teens, early 20s, I don't know. And I was a kid, and I was a husky kid as I am now. You know, so hey, maybe this will fit you. And I think it was still very large on me, but I loved that shirt.
Yeah, I love that. That's a good choice. It's a good one. The next one's sort of like a two-parter. The first part is my first ever favorite wrestler.
It doesn't age very well, but it's Hulk Hogan.
It doesn't age well, does it? But that's the thing, isn't it? It's like I wouldn't blame you, because I feel like in a lot of instances, a lot of people's favorite first wrestler doesn't age well. Like
I will say, apart from him, Sting, my other first favorite, that aged much better.
Yeah, a lot better. Yeah, unquestionably. But I understand that. I think Hulkster's a pretty common one, isn't it? So like, I get that. And then the second part of that leading on is your current favorite wrestler.
This is hard, and I don't like. I'm always hesitant to say these things, out loud.
Would it make it harder or easier if I said you could say one signed and one unsigned?
Probably harder.
Okay, all right.
Because I don't want to. although it would be in the spirit of the show, I will say, I think it's Mercedes. Moné. She was my favorite when she was in NXT. She was my favorite for a good stretch of her WWE run. I was, just as a fan, very disappointed when she did not kind of get to carry out the rest of that New Japan and Stardom run last year. I am beyond excited to see what she does now. Unsigned, gosh, that is very, very hard.
I'd find that a lot harder. I've always found that a lot harder.
Take any number of the wrestlers that are on my show, because they are genuinely some of my favorite people to watch. A lot of times when I have free time and watching wrestling for pleasure, as opposed to because I have to report on something specific, it is the independent stuff that I do gravitate toward. Yeah,
I've always been the same. I've always been like, I always try and make, and again, I know I don't have the same pressures work-wise as you do, but I've always had that, like, and it's why I want to start the podcast, is I always gravitate more to the indies than I have the big companies. I just think it's like, there's that specialness there that, like, really, really pulls me in. But I like it. I like Mercedes again. I always find it really funny, you mention it, and like, because I know, like, not what my answer to that would be, but I always find with wrestling fans, you can sort of, like, the thing that can divide the room is when you ask who's your favourite member of the Four Horsewomen. Like, just because in terms of, like, who I know, the friends I know, and, like, people in the wrestling community I know as well. Like, we had, a little while ago, we had Ella J on, and I know her favourite is Charlotte Flair. And, like, yourself, you say Mercedes. I always go Becky Lynch. I always had the fondness for Becky Lynch. So like, I always find it really funny that's I feel like how you can divide a wrestling fans in their opinions is ask them who their favorite of the four is.
Which is funny because even if there's one of them that you don't like for whatever reason, there is no objectively looking at that group of women and saying that they're not all superstars and fantastic at what they do. You could argue that this person is better in the ring or better on the mic or more compelling for various reasons, but yeah, there's not.
I think there was that
like,
stage.
You can make a reasonable case for any of them.
Yeah, well, there was that stage, wasn't there, where like obviously Becky and Charlotte and Sasha got called up, and Becky was sort of left. Bayley was left on her own in NXT, and you thought, oh, maybe she's going to get left behind. But even now, like, you can't look at any of those four women and tell me any of them have been left behind in any way. They're all like legit mega stars now.
And especially Bayley, once she was able to have her initial heel run with Sasha and that whole situation. But frankly, still one of the best and maybe the best match I've ever seen in person was the Takeover Brooklyn match with Sasha and Bayley.
Nice.
And Bayley won the challenge. It's just perfect.
That was a fun moment. That was a match I looked at and I'm like, God, I wish I was there. Like. It
was incredible, and that was one that Megan went with me to see. So that was a nice memory to share with her and look back on. And like, wasn't it crazy that we were there for that match? Who would have thought that years later, because there was this real belief at the time that who knows what's going to happen on the main roster at these, because like just the track record was not very good.
It wasn't at the time. It wasn't, and they did all four of them huge justice. So yeah, credit them for that. You answered my next question because, well, you may have answered unless you can think of anything else, because the next one is the best match I've seen in person.
Man, I still think that's got to be it all this time later.
Yeah.
It's just really sticks out of my mind. I remember large sections of that match and the feeling in the room as they played out. The finish of that match, just incredible. And just such a nice moment. I mean, you had everybody from the most hardened smart mark to the most, naive, new to watching pro wrestling child. Everyone was just thrilled that Bayley won. Not a single person was rooting against her that I saw, and they may have been chased out into the middle of Brooklyn had they done that. But that was a really good one. Man, there's so many others that I could mention, but I think I've got to go with that.
I love that. Delving into like myself with the indies, and again, it's not really a delve because it has a big star in it, and so I'm sure like you would have seen it or at least know about it. I was in Brighton at Riptide Wrestling when they had Pac versus Cara Noir, and like we were
such a good match.
Incredible. It was. I think the thing that made it better was the fact that we were all looking there, and like again, a Riptide regular, and I spoke to the guys who ran it quite a lot, and so like we knew what like they were up against in terms of like budget and stuff like that. And they announced Cara versus secret opponent, and we were all like, oh, I wonder if it'll be Pac. But no one in that room actually believed for 1 second it would actually be Pac. We were all saying it like, oh, wouldn't that be funny? And then his music hits, and you see him come out, and I've never heard a pop like it. Like, in arenas, in stadiums, I've never heard a pop like I heard in that room of 200 people that night. Like, it was incredible.
Which really sets the stage for them to then go out and have the match they're going to have and pushes them to the next level. And then, knowing how it's going to be received and being fueled by the adrenaline that comes with that. It really is. I think I rewatched that one time last year. Riptide was so good. I really miss it.
Brilliant. It was so much fun. I used to live in Brighton. I live in London now. I used to live in Brighton, so I was a regular there, for their entire run. And it was. I've not had again. There are a couple of promotions that come close that I love, and I'm a regular at now. But I don't think I've had an experience as a fan going to indie wrestling that I had at those shows. Because they were special. That was like.
No, I know what you mean. I used to go to. It's similarly disintegrated now, but I used to go to Chikara shows all the time. They were my absolute favorite because it was this mix of humor and silliness, but also just top-notch wrestling. They bring in people from all over the world. They Chikara ran a Joshi show a better part of 20 years ago, which is not something that happened in the U.S. at that point. They brought all these legendary wrestlers over, and obviously the company ended up having a lot of problems just systemically and throughout. It had to close down, but. That doesn't mean there aren't still some fond memories there, and I think it's good to be able to look back and appreciate those what they are.
Absolutely, and again, as someone who gravitates to indie wrestling as well, like yourself, you said, I think the wild thing is seeing those shows back now and seeing the stars that are signed now and on really big shows and like what they're doing. Like it's mad for me like knowing that like I took a little break from wrestling in terms of like, again, I think as most people do when they're like teenagers, you know what I mean, and then you get back into it. But then I started going to indie shows again. And like, it's wild seeing like like AEW at Wembley. I was like seeing Aussie Open and like Tony Storm and all these people. And I was like, hang on, like I've seen these guys wrestle in front of like 50 people. How is this happening?
I guess it was 2017, 2018, 2019, that stretch of Brit Rez was just fantastic. And obviously you mentioned a couple of non-British wrestlers there, but
no, but the ones that came over, you know what I mean? Yeah. Obviously Will Ospreay, obviously I forgot about Will Ospreay somehow, but you know Will Ospreay as well. Like he's some name. People know him, right? He's a little bit of a name now.
A little bit. But watching it back then, and yeah, I mean, even when NXT UK formed, and a lot of those names got called over, brought up, whatever. It was strange because it was this thing that like was getting a bit of buzz around it, at least over here. Obviously, it's a different experience, but that was something I would watch a lot of, and actually Meg would watch with me. And when they did have the tour back in 2018, I believe it was, we went and saw it in Philly. Yeah, to have a lot of those people now just be on television every week. I mean, even someone like Orange Cassidy and. Cover your ears if you don't want the illusion of pro wrestling ruined, but Orange Cassidy performed as Fire Ant in Chikara for many years. Which is very, on its face, very silly character, but just fantastic wrestler. And then lo and behold, and he goes and he's got top star in AEW as well. So it is just, or El Generico's friend Sami Zayn, that's another example.
Yeah, no, it rings a bell, doesn't it? Yeah, he's mentioned him a few times.
Yeah.
No, brilliant. I love it. The next one, go back to this. We're on a little tangent there, which I love, but like next one, going back to list is again, I sort of struggle putting this one in there, but like again, it doesn't have to be like something that you're shitting on massively, but like it's the worst match I've ever seen.
So I actually have. I need to double check who was in the actual match. But there was this infamous. I need to see who the one wrestler's partner was. Sorry.
No, that's all right.
I'm looking this up on my phone. Is this a normal thing that happens?
Oh no, this happens all the time. To be fair, on the podcast, like we have a lot of this.
Okay, I thought it was. So the first. No, I mentioned back in the earlier days of my fandom that I was going to a lot of house shows because that's what was here. I think I just missed. The SummerSlam that was in Pennsylvania, but it was my first actual Monday Night Raw that I ever attended was the infamous edition that featured the tag team match between Trish Stratus and Bradshaw and Jackie Gata and Christopher Nowinski.
Oh, okay.
Which is cited as an all-time just bad match. Everything disintegrated. I only feel confident calling that the worst because I know that everyone involved was just deeply, we don't want to think about that match anymore.
They're not going to come back at you. They'll be like, yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's a bad one.
That happened to be, on the show. So you had the lovely experience of having Shawn Michaels against John Cena in an hour classic. And then I had that one.
Slightly different, isn't it? A slightly different first Raw experience.
A little bit. But
to be fair, I mean, as two matches, I don't think anything encapsulates the entire run of Monday Night Raw better than that, right? Like,
especially that 2000.
It could go so well and it could go so bad, and I think that's the beauty of Monday Night Raw.
Oh yeah, I could speak for hours about the glory and crushing lows of 2003 era Raw alone. I mean, that's just man.
Brilliant. The next one, there's only a couple more left. The next one is I think you might have mentioned it actually in this chat, over the course of this chat, is the match that I go back to most.
I'm going to pick a slightly different one for this, and I haven't watched it in a little bit, but I realize I'm naming a lot of non-independent matches, and now I'm wishing I would go a different route. But,
no, it's fine. It's fine. These are the matches that made you, so you gotta.
Yeah. So the unsanctioned match between Tommaso Ciampa and Johnny Gargano from one of the takeovers, I think New Orleans, perhaps. There was just, you asked earlier about this pro wrestling being an escape and a catharsis, and I don't even know what I was down about on that night, but I was just really kind of brooding in my head about everything, and the fact that I can't remember what I was sad about should tell you.
It worked, yeah, it worked.
But I went and watched that match, and it just completely sucked me in. I was absorbed by it, and I think I rewatched it the very next day. I never go back that quickly and watch something again. And then I watched it however many weeks afterward, and that's one that I think I'm due for a revisit on that I hope holds up because I thought it was very good.
No, I think it does. I think it absolutely holds up. I think it's a good choice. Yeah. And the final one on the list is someone asks you, why do you love professional wrestling? What do you show them? It doesn't have to necessarily be a match. It can be a promo. It can be a vignette. What wrestling-wise do you show them to be like, this is why I love what I love?
This is tricky.
This is a tough one. I know there's a lot. I think this is the one that stumps people more than anything else.
Yeah, I think it would either be. I think it would probably be something from that Chikara run. I think there's that match that gets circulated, the last couple of minutes of it, every 6 to 8 months on social media. And it was Sami Zayn's good friend El Generico, Kota Ibushi, Nick Jackson, I believe, and Jigsaw. It was a 4-way match at King of Trios, non-tournament match. You can actually see me and a couple of my friends in the front row for that one. Just absolutely incredible in terms of there's some silliness in it due to the people involved. The Young Bucks were not quite their full Young Buckian selves yet, so it's tuned down a little bit, but just incredible athleticism. So I think that's a good one. The Sasha Bailey match is also right up there. I think I would show someone. They would need a little bit of a highlight package first. But I think Kasey Catal winning the American Deathmatch Championship.
Yeah.
And it's gruesome, and I would have to prep them for that. And
that's for your that's for your non-fans who like horror as well, and you can adjust them.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's some good choices. I always go silly personally. I always go the weird stuff, like at work. I've been trying to convince some of my work friends to come with me to wrestling at some point, and I showed them clips from Eve's recent Multiverse Rumble. And I'm like, that's why. It's just bonkers, right? It's just ridiculous. That's why you like it, because it's the weirdest thing you've ever seen.
Yes. Yeah. Which is funny because it is, it's the exception.
Yeah.
But you get little exceptions in every.
Exactly. Yeah. I always go on the silly side. I always verge on the sillier stuff because I'm I feel like that's what appeals to the audience I'm trying to attract.
I do remember actually watching. Friend of a friend used to host these monthly wrestling brunches, and he showed one of the Riptide Rumbles. And there was at least one person there who was not a wrestling fan and watched that and was like, oh, this is incredibly entertaining. And who's this person? And just very, and again, silliness in there. More silliness than not, I guess, with a Riptide Rumble.
I mean, if you want silly and Riptide, the one that sticks in my mind is I don't know if you've seen it, Gene Money versus Sue Young.
It's been a long time.
I think it's on their YouTube, and they just have the weirdest Halloweeny match.
Yeah,
it's brilliant. It's fantastic.
Yeah, those two are great.
Yeah, I mean, Riptide put on loads of matches like that. I think that's why I gravitate to those sort of matches. Is because I think those are the ones that made me pop the most. But that's
great. Yeah.
No, that's brilliant. That brings an end to that feature, nearly an end to the chat. And Kevin, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, talking about your show coming up, and talking all other things wrestling. It's been a pleasure having you here.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's been a good time for me.
No, of course. I'm glad. Well, our final question on this list is the only one that's not actually left by me, because we have a closing tradition here on the podcast where our last guest leaves a question for our next guest.
Oh, one of those. Okay.
And I'm not allowed to tell you who the wrestler is because we don't give away context. Although this one, I can't imagine it would give away any context at all.
Okay.
So this is a very bizarre question. I'm intrigued to see how you're going to answer this, because the person who asked it, I asked for their answer as well. I'm just curious to see if this is a thing where the answer's that obvious. But Who would win in a wrestling match? A grilled cheese sandwich or a soft taco?
Never underestimate a good grilled cheese sandwich. Grilled cheese.
Yeah? Why is I'm intrigued by the thought process. or lack of, perhaps.
Because it's a little bit more, unpredictable. It could be a stinky cheese. It could be a cheap cheese. It could be a very slimy cheese that will kind of slip away from everyone. And let's go with that.
That's intriguing. I love the thought process. The person we had asked the question said the taco because it's like Hispanic and spicy and it had a bit of fire. It'll have a bit of fire to it. And
oh my gosh!
I was like, that's a little intriguing as well. But
I'll have to ask you off air who put that question out.
It's a bizarre. It's not, oddly enough, it's not the most bizarre one we've had. We've had plenty of bizarre. We've had a couple we've had a couple that I haven't even been able to ask because they've been that bad. But
oh wow. Okay.
But I'll give you some time to think about one that you're going to ask for our next guest. Actually, I think looking at who I've got booked, the next guest is someone you know pretty well, so this could be quite interesting. That brings us lovely to the. I think it's a brilliant way to end the show. Kevin, thank you so much again for coming on. It's been great to hear about Thrash Elvania. Good luck with the show. I'm sure it's going to go great. I can't wait to see it. And congratulations for putting it on and everything you've been doing. And I'm sure you're going to do everyone proud. It's going to be brilliant. We always give our final word here on the podcast to our guest, a final promo, if you will. So for yourself, for anyone watching this who doesn't yet have their tickets for the show, but is considering going, why should they come along? Why is this going to be one of the shows not to miss over WrestleMania weekend?
So first of all, Effie's Big Gay Brunch is sold out. So if you don't have a ticket, you can't go to that. You can watch it later, and I will certainly watch it later. But I'm not going to mention the fact that Kaiju Big Battel is running opposite me, and I'm just going to conveniently forget that and say that we're the best thing that you can buy a ticket to in that time slot. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's for a great cause. Some of the best people I know in professional wrestling and some of the most entertaining performers and promising athletes. It's just going to be a great time. I should probably plug in. It's Saturday, April 6th at noon. It will be streaming live on iwtv.live. You could check out my Twitter at Wackelvaney, WACKELVANEY, and it will have links to buy tickets or donate. Even if you don't go, you can still donate. We appreciate it.